Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Garjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. On March 31st, the first round of the Ukrainian presidential elections was held. According to the Central Election Commission, voter turnout was over 63%. Ukrainians all over the world also took part in the presidential elections. Overall, 101 polling stations in 72 countries were opened, from Australia to the United States. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Ambassador Volodymyr Khandogiy, President of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association. Hello and thank you for being with us today.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you here, first of all. Second of all, according to the Central Election Commission data, the top candidates are comedian Volodymyr Zelensky, current President of Ukraine Petro Poroshenko, and former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. How would you comment these preliminary results?
First of all, I would challenge a bit that he's a comedian.
Yes.
It's in the people's mind, and in particular all around the world, in the foreign countries, they call him comedian. But,
well, he is comedian.
Yes, he's an actor. Yeah. Well, we can argue who exactly,
showman, actor, comedian.
Who exactly he is, but I would hate to have a comedian as the president of my country. But that's...
So you do not trust?
I do not trust comedians. My small kid always was scared of comedians, he didn't like those comedians. But nevertheless, Volodymyr Zelensky, yes, he got most of the votes in as far as I know, with almost all the electoral commissions completed their work. But certainly, he is not the winner in the electoral district in the foreign countries, as you might know.
There is an interesting fact that citizens of Ukraine who are residing in Ukraine, they supported Zelensky, but diaspora supported more Petro Poroshenko, the current president. And do you see some kind of tendency in this? Actually,
this is a tradition. Basically, we also have to be very cautious in formulating like diaspora is in favor of anyone. It's not diaspora, as a matter of fact. It's Ukrainian citizens that live in the foreign countries. So diaspora is a much wider notion. There are many Ukrainians living in other countries that are not citizens of Ukraine, and certainly they do not vote. So, and traditionally, I took part in many elections throughout my diplomatic career as an ambassador to various countries, and I was among those who sort of organizationally helped conducting those elections. And almost always, I would hesitate to tell that always, but on most occasions, Ukrainians voters that are voting in foreign countries, they support
the president of that time.
The president of the time.
This is interesting.
It's interesting, but you have to also take into account that a majority, or sizable part of the electorate abroad is the members of the Ukrainian diplomatic missions, and they represent
the government.
They represent this president. All the ambassadors who are currently serving in foreign countries, they are being posted in those countries by this current president.
Yes.
So it would be ridiculous not to vote for this president if you are the one who was appointed by this president. And certainly the ambassador in the embassy, and he has many instances of talking to various people, various Ukrainians living in this country, he would certainly be advocating the current president. So I'm not surprised that the current president is the favorite in this race in the foreign countries.
Well, speaking of the organization of these presidential elections, this time the Central Election Commission has invited the biggest amount of international observers to monitor the transparency of this presidential elections, and we're speaking now about 2,344 official observers from different organizations in countries but Russia. What is their verdict on the level of democracy and transparency of Ukraine's elections?
Well, yes, you're right that this is a record number of foreign monitors now overseeing the elections. Their verdict is not yet known, but it would be there would be a report published after the completion of the electoral process. But as far as I know, I haven't heard of any, so to say, complaints, systemic complaints on the way of conducting elections, on the way of organizing, and on other matters. Certainly there were some instances of fraud. We know some attempts to falsify elections. It's there,
some violations.
But all those, facts, they do not suggest that they would influence the overall outcome of the election. So we will have to wait and see, what will be the final verdict. As you know, for the Western countries, for the international organizations, the most important thing is free and fair elections. If these elections were to characterized as free and fair, then they will be recognized all around the world. But this final verdict will come a little bit later.
Well, if we speak about these cases that were reported to the police, we're talking about approximately 2,000 violations. Yeah. Well, as far as media says, the violations are minor. They're mostly concerned about taking photos of ballots or making somebody's vote public. And in my opinion, the most severe, for me, violation was maybe handing over the ballot without issuing the passport of the citizen of Ukraine. But if we compare, you mentioned that you were helping and organizing the elections before. If we compare these elections with 2014 in terms of transparency, in terms of, well, so to say, clear procedures, what would you say?
Well, if you compare elections in the outside of Ukraine,
let's compare both.
And here, certainly, all the how you call it, the wrongdoings or whatever they
violations,
are, violations, they are not taking place in the elections outside of Ukraine, in the embassies and in the electoral polls abroad. Almost all of them are happening here in Ukraine. So I don't know of any meaningful instance of wrongdoings during the elections abroad. So maybe I can remember one or two instances when the ballot paper was just torn apart. It was one or two.
Out of protest.
It was also a reaction, a very emotional reaction of one of the voters that had to wait in a long queue.
So that was his disappointment.
To get to the ballot box, and then he did it just
torn apart.
Torn it apart. But like you said, there were only 2,400 or something instances of the again, violations. But if you take into account that there are more than 30,000
polling stations
in Ukraine, this is really a minor figure, and it certainly will not have any influence on the final outcome of the elections. So practically, it could be ignored. I'm not saying that it could be ignored.
But it will
police has to investigate
the results.
But I would not say that the photographing of the ballot is a minor violation. Because why do they do that? They do that not just to have a selfie. They do that to prove as a proof that they voted as they were told to, and produce this photo to those people that were attempted to buy this vote. And this is kind of a proof. So that's why this is very important and very I mean, serious violation, taking photo inside the ballot, in the ballot chamber, whatever it is, and then with a view to produce it to the curators.
This is very interesting. I haven't thought of this. But
it is indeed the way why it was forbidden to take pictures inside this area, because that may be the instruction from those who are, you know, trying to buy their votes.
Yeah, just to prevent corruption. I understand. Let's hope that the police will investigate these instances ASAP. But we're also in the studio to discuss the way that the Ukrainian elections are perceived around the world. And of course, every candidate in his or her campaign has been pushing on different agendas, even those that are already written down in the Constitution of Ukraine about EU and NATO integration. And could you please compare for our audience how have the election campaigns of of each out of those top three candidates differed in terms of international diplomacy and foreign policy?
Well, like I said, that the major, you know, concern of the Western observers is whether or not those elections were free and fair. What kind of political agenda was pursued by individual candidates, it's not really a matter of concern to the Western observers. But certainly they would be, hypothetically, we can assume that people living in the European Union or in the United States, they would be more happy if the new candidate, if a new president would pursue the same foreign policy objective, that is to say, membership in the European Union or in NATO, as it was under this current president. So in this sense, certainly they would play in favor, or rather, they would be more supportive of this kind of an approach. But I think that those three top candidates, they have in their, you know, political program, maybe Zelensky to a lesser extent, this notion or the slogan to eventually become member of the European Union and NATO. Of course, President Poroshenko, he is well known in the West as this strong supporter of the European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration, and due to his effort, these two notions have been introduced, implanted into the constitution of Ukraine, precisely to prevent from removing this objective from the Ukrainian foreign policy agenda.
Speaking of international reaction, Ambassador Mingarelli, the head of the EU delegation to Ukraine, didn't sound very positive and optimistic about Ukraine's elections. I want to quote him, much is at stake in these elections compared to many other elections in this region. We see this judging by the rise in political temperature. One moment, not very pleasant, is that the cost of the election campaign has greatly increased. This shows that virtue still cannot overcome financial interest in Ukraine. Unfortunately, many see the situation as a financial opportunity that is worth investing. How would you comment on this?
Well, this is a very complicated statement by Hugh Mingarelli, and it needs to really look into the whole context of what he said. But certainly many candidates, presumably, and this statement was actually aired before the start of the election, if I'm not mistaken. They think that they're coming into the Ukrainian political life means that they would be better off in their business opportunities. Certainly this is the case, maybe, but I'm not sure.
Well, to push through their business agendas, but also investing in their political campaigns too much money. But
this is investment into their campaign money. This issue has been sort of regulated by the respective law of Ukraine. And if there are violations of that law, this has to be investigated.
This will be made public. Well, there is an opposite comment by German ambassador to Ukraine, Ernst Reichel. He believes that one of the most important features of this election is that the result is not known in advance. And this is basically the test of Ukraine's democracy. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but this is not the only case. We did know the results of the elections back in 2010, for instance, where President Yanukovych and Tymoshenko were so close in their polls that we didn't know until the last moment who will become the president. So this is a characteristic feature of Ukrainian elections throughout the history.
But this doesn't mean democracy then, if we speak about
It does mean
history.
a democracy, of course. We all know who will be the next president of the, let's say, in Russia or in Kazakhstan. But we never know who will be the next president in Ukraine.
And this is a positive sign. Well, unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I thank you for your valuable comments and thank you for being a guest today in our studio.
Thank you very much.
That was Ambassador Volodymyr Khandogiy, President of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association. Thank you for watching Head to Head and stay tuned for more with UATV.